Stranger Things Season 3 is charming but frustrating. Hey race, a spoiler, Stranger Things 3 is both smarter and lazier than Stranger Things 2. But at least the Stranger Things 3 is almost here, and it sees all the characters from Hawkins, Indiana growing and evolving. And yes, the second season of Stranger Things came in for its fair share of criticism, including from Vox, for a meandering and sometimes disjointed plot, and writing that clearly undervalued and underused the show's female characters. And yet, as watch Stranger Things Season 3 trailer people. This time around, however, a new set of problems arises, and weirdly enough, a lot of them don't concern the story itself, but the show's aesthetic and technical choices. Stranger Things doesn't usually struggle with those elements. More often, Gallery Ath Stranger Things Season 3 cast brings a few new characters to Hawkins Refinery 29. The positive side is that for viewers whose main concern is hanging out with the kids of Hawkins and enjoying the quirky, nostalgia-laced humor and fun that Stranger Things excels at, Season 3 is pretty much on top of its game. Hey race, a spoiler-free rundown of what's good, what's bad, and what's somewhere in between about Season 3. One of reasons Stranger Things 2 was frustrating was that for most of the season, characters were siloed away from each other, pretty inexplicably. 11 went on a rant, but Stranger Things has figured out how to fix this issue in Season 3. The show once again, the narrative of Season 3 is still split between different subplots, but they're all obviously connected to each other from the start. This creates a level, and the subplots are fun. Although the writing, there is one major flaw with the plot, in that the show mostly neglects to provide any larger reasoning for it. But that's most. Stranger Things Season 3 editing is erratic at best. It relies so much on top of the flashbacks, the editing frequently jumps confusingly between cross-current action sequences in different locations, in ways that create avoidable narrative confusion rather than suspense. At times, and I am not done. In addition to the consequence of all these edits is that the pacing frequently stutters, and in fact sometimes grinds to a halt. Since the flashback, one of Stranger Things' greatest assets is the show's irresistible cast dynamics, and in Season 3, the teen ensemble, led by Millie Bobby Brown as Elle and Finn Wolfhard as Mike, is as capable as ever. At times meanwhile, Gaten Matarazzo's Dustin and Joe Keery's Steve Harrington, everyone's favorite babysitter, are two of the show's strongest comedic weapons, and the decision to keep them together at all times this season is a smart one. And the upbeat energy, where it really works in Season 3 is with the arrival of new character Robin Maya Hawke, who finds herself mixed up with Hawkins' saniest friends group and proceeds to steal every scene she's in. Deadpan and Loki. That said, nearly all of the season's other new characters are ciphers, present to serve plot points or deliver comedy without substance. One character, as I hinted above, this is especially notable in the case of Max and Billy, because they, for all intents and purposes, are still new characters, and Billy's motivations and backstory in particular are largely still unknown to us. When we're asked to, and the lack of emotional connection is especially obvious toward the end of the season, when narrative subthreads that should be moving us most seem to fizzle and resolve without much intensity at all. I found myself, Stranger Things has definitely moved away from parroting familiar 80s tropes as closely as it once did, and while that's a good thing, it seems to be relying even more on belaboring the 80s in jokes it does include. It just doesn't. The biggest of these is Hawkins' new mall, Starcourt, in all its colorful, funky detail. The mall functions, but what it isn't is innovative. Although the setting of the Duffer Brothers have developed a bad habit of relying on Elle as a kind of deus ex machina to rescue her friends and make 11th hour arrivals get it to save the day. Thankfully, Stranger Things has well established that its teen characters aren't just any group of adolescents. They have tons of in Vox's roundtable wrap-up of Stranger Things 2, we dissected how unsatisfying the season's treatment of women was, from Nancy's largely token side plot to the unnecessary jealousy sub-thread between Elle and Max. In Season 3, the show finally has more than one female character per generation, and Season 3 finally offers scenes where these characters bond over something other than a boy. The women on the show, meanwhile, After 2 seasons in which her main role was to fret and be erratic, Joyce finally gets a chance to take charge of her own subplot. Though said subplot also kinda paints her as being as kooky and erratic as ever. Still, in one of the season's more interesting arcs, Nancy gets her own 80s trope in the form of a working girl story that sees her tackling sexism at the local newspaper where she's interning alongside Jonathan. The storyline and while it may sound like these themes and storylines are a bit shoehorned in, yeah, they are, but they represent far more effort than Stranger Things has bothered to expend on its women characters in the past. This effort is all. That said, Season 3 oddly loses sight of some of its best characters and their relationships. The Duffer Brothers have said in the past that they recognized how good the chemistry is between Eleven and Chief Hopper, so it's strange that they deliberately keep the two apart for most of Season 3. It's not as if in fact, Season 3 seems to shrug at multiple character relationships. It's forgivable. All of this is a reminder that writing has always been Stranger Things' biggest weakness. When it's not closely following pre-established tropes, the show frequently feels like it doesn't know what to do next. And while it's committed, Season 2 mostly delivered on developing characterizations, but its plot was frequently marching in place without a lot of direction. Season 3 met all 8 episodes of Stranger Things. Season 3 will premiere Thursday, July 4th on Netflix. Gallery. The Stranger Things cast hanging out at their premiere will turn any frown upside down. Pops Yuga.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park, pot.